Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some alternate history hub, and this time we're not necessarily going to be exploring one singular alternate scenario. We're going to be looking at 10 of them that are actually dumb. Well, according to Cody, we'll see if I agree or disagree. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love you to join the Discord. Follow me over at Twitch. Please do go check out the two gaming channels here on YouTube. One is for edited content, the other is for the stream VODs. Under a minute. Let's go, let's go ahead and dive right in. I will no longer have long-winded intros like had been sort of the standard on this channel for quite some time. Anyways, I'm getting long-winded right now. Let's dive in.
When it comes to alternate history scenarios, the main goal is to always think about a timeline that's kinda fun and different. But how one gets to that timeline is on a spectrum, one that ranges from incredibly realistic, where one extremely rare event in our timeline is slightly altered in a reasonable way, to stuff like, what if Germany won World War II by nuking DC? Recently, I've tried to step my game up and make videos about scenarios which are fun, realistic, and allow us to learn about our own timeline. But today's video is all about the Wall of Shame. Scenarios, or point of divergences, that make no sense, and fall apart under the littlest bit of scrutiny. To help me on my mission, I made a special challenge on my Discord community. And the following scenarios by the 10 winners.
What if Alexander conquered Italy? Okay, yeah, that one's pretty dumb. What if Rome industrialized? Okay, yeah, that's pretty dumb. What if Harold Hardrada recreated the North Sea Empire? Yeah, I don't know what the fuck that would even do. That wouldn't do anything. Ming colonization of America? Yeah, it's super unrealistic. Sunset invasion. What if the South one was Italy joined Central Powers? That one I don't think is... Well, we'll see, but I don't know if that one's really all that dumb. That one would have shifted quite a lot, because that would have... Italy joining the Central Powers took away... I mean, Italy joining the Entente forced the Austro-Hungarians and Germans to put troops on the Italian border, and allowed the French to not have troops focus literally like all of their troops on the German border instead of needing to diverge and have troops on both the German and Italian border. So I'm curious how they're gonna interpret that one. What if Republican Spain won? Ah. Okay, maybe that one. Operation Downfall Man in High Castle.
Greatly helped me in the making of this list. So, let's do this! Before talking about some unrealistic scenarios, you know what's more realistic than you might think? Looking back into the past. Your own heritage. Actually, not your heritage, my heritage. The sponsor of today's video. I love history, but there's nothing quite like researching the history of yourself.
RPG Tabletops is now offering their 10,000 maps bundle at an incredible discount.
Alexander invades Rome. Yeah, this one's...
Alright, let's start big. Let's start with one of the most common and fundamentally flawed scenarios. What if Alexander invaded Rome? Well, for starters, everyone who wants to increase Alexander's lifespan kinda forgot that he wore one of history's thickest plot armors. There were numerous occasions where he just miraculously survived. But even if he was somehow able to continue his hot streak, we quickly stumble upon the second problem here. Alexander already had plans for his next expedition. An expedition that was aimed at Arabia, followed up by a trip to Carthage. If the man himself didn't consider Rome as a potential threat or even prize, why would the rest of us? Oh yeah, that's right. We want to see the epic clash of legionnaires versus silver shields. Apart from being centuries off, the biggest problem was how overextended the Macedonian Empire already was. I would bet that out of 100 timelines, we live in the one where Alexander got to live the longest. No point
Oh, interesting take. Okay.
of divergence could prevent his empire from collapsing, and no foe could present an epic opponent worthy of topping what he had already accomplished.
I mean, I don't know. He was largely just taking over what the Achaemenid Empire had already established, and he wasn't really ruling it in any sort of way that was all that different from the Achaemenids. except for maybe like the Greeks being seen as the top dogs of civilization uh um of the socioeconomic structure of the empire, as opposed to it have been Persians under the Achaemenids. But like, the Achaemenid Empire, like he was largely just ruling like the Achaemenids did. So if someone rebelled, he would come in and put them down harshly, like the Achaemenid Empire. And if they just obeyed, right, they got to live a pretty prosperous life under Alexander. Now, of course, it fractured so quickly after his death that we can't really say for certain. But I like to think and point to, you know, the longevity of the Achaemenid Empire as a sign of what Alexander's empire could have been had he actually administrated it. And perhaps it's the fact that he never bothered with the administration side of things, is what would have led to its collapse even had he lived. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, essentially him invading Rome is stupid because the Italian peninsula wasn't really seen as having any resources all that valuable. The wealth of the ancient world was the Middle East. That's why he conquered it.
Human progress is not a straight line, and the fall of the Romans is the best example for that. It took humanity over a millennia to recover the level of logistics, army sizes, infrastructure capabilities, life expectancy, medicinal knowledge, and so much more. But what if Rome had gone one step further? What if Rome adopted steam power? After all, Heron's steam engine was well known to the Romans, even if it was just a party trick. Surely all it takes is a good POD to propel Romans to the industrial age, right? Not really. Industrialism is not a spontaneous event that occurs in a vacuum. It has a list of like 15 prerequisites, of which Rome met about 4. Food surplus, domesticated drought animals, the concept of math, and most importantly, the belief that the natural and supernatural are separate. So far so good. But going down the list, there are some crucial steps that the Romans never came close to achieving. Ancient Rome failed to find the connection between physics, math, and engineering. They also had no sophisticated economic theory. This is a big one. And any society that dabbles in slavery is kind of cursed with stagnation. Without a relatively strong middle class and class mobility, industrialization is little more than a distant dream. When we add to that the lack of machine tools, calculus, capitalism, and the scientific method, the amount of divergences we need to make for this scenario to work in the first place becomes unbearable. There is a bigger chance.
I mean, surely they had to have had some form of the scientific method, maybe not as we know it today, but surely they were still making scientific discoveries at the time. And the only way you can make scientific discoveries and mathematical progress is through the scientific method. So just because maybe they never wrote about it, I don't think that really necessarily negates the fact that they didn't have some notion of it, of what we would regard as the scientific method. Now, I also don't believe capitalism is what creates industrialism. I don't think those two are so intertwined with one another. I think it's the notion of progress, which I will agree on. There needs to be class mobility within Rome for industrialization to occur, right? Because again, that idea of progress moving forward, that is going to be integral to, right? It is going to be a burgeoning middle class that does lead to industrialization. So I would say that is certainly the biggest aspect as to why Rome could never industrialize. But yeah, the other thing, kind of disagree with a little bit. I don't.
Chance of the Nazis developing a nuke than Rome ever utilizing the steam engine. Keep in mind that while this goes for Rome, this can also apply to ancient Greece, China, Persia, and Byzantium. So, sorry Jimmy, no Steampunk Wars for you.
Harold Hartman.
This scenario gets a lot of attention, and for good reason. It's fascinating, it seems plausible, and a few slight tweaks could change the course of Britain forever. In our timeline, 1066 marks the end of the Viking Age, largely because Norwegian King Harald Hardrada was defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Instead of being conquered from the north, England succumbed to the Norman invasion from the south, led by William the Conqueror. But what if Hardrada's fierce berserkers weren't caught off guard by the Anglo-Saxon king? Following his victory against Godwinson, he would march down to London and repel the Normans. Yeah, sadly, this latter part is what earns the scenario a part in the video. For the legendary Hardrada, also known as the Bulgar Burner, to be victorious, he needed to deal with William as fast as possible. But this meant that the Norwegian army, which just crossed the North Sea and defeated the Anglo-Saxons,
Yeah, it's essentially like whoever, right? Like whoever, if it had been William versus Hardrada, then Godwinson would have won, right? Godwinson versus Hardrada means William wins. If it had been first William versus Godwinson, then Hardrada would win, maybe, right? If I would say, though, that if Godwinson versus William had fought first, Godwinson would have won, and then probably raised more soldiers to then go and deal with Hardrada, in which Godwinson probably would have won again. I think it's just because what Godwinson ends up doing is he first goes to deal with Hardrada, because I think Hardrada definitely lands first, but he knew that William would be coming for him. But he goes to deal with Hardrada first, wins, and then he makes a hasty march south, does not call any more shiremen up to reinforce his army. And also some, if I'm remembering correctly, some will argue that he probably couldn't have even drawn up more men because there were two very influential eldermen who owned a lot of English land at the time, who were not very cooperative with Godwinson, and who also probably just did not like him, and so they would not have provided him with soldiers, and so Godwinson's largely fucking screwed. But yeah, out of the three, that's the one that's least likely to win.
Now had to rush all the way down south. More than likely, he would take his time to rest his soldiers and take control of some crucial settlements and castles. The battles of Stamford and Hastings are just 3 weeks apart, and Godwinson was able to pull that off only because it was his territory to defend and freely traverse. But let's make a massive leap of faith and say that a wounded and exhausting Viking force, which somehow gets accepted by the locals, meets the conqueror. The thing is, the Normans were just as good on the field, and William was a much better strategist. Hardrada was a decent tactician, sure, but he's more well known for his legendary bravery and skill in combat than being a strategic leader. Then we have the cavalry, or at least the Normans did. The X factor in medieval warfare. The tanks that dominated the meta until the advent of gunpowder. No amount of Viking war paint and fury could stop the charge of the heavy knights. And ultimately, even if Hardrada did meet William in battle, history probably would have played out similarly to our timeline. The Heavenly Kingdom of California. Los Angeles? More like Laos Anji. That was terrible. Yeah, no, the Ming Treasure voyages are amazing in their own right, but they were never about colonization. The goal was to build giant ships and sail to known civilizations, so that everyone would acknowledge the superiority of Chinese pottery. This was a vanity project of the Emperor,
China,
who, let's face it, had more resources than he knew what to do with. And like any enthusiastic hobbyist, once they die, I don't think their next of kin is going to continue dumping cash into their 40k collection. There was nothing the Americas, or the rest of the world for that matter, could offer the Chinese and the Confucian religion, which unlike Christianity didn't put heavy emphasis on evangelizing others. China really didn't care about others. The American West Coast is twice as far from Asia as the American East Coast is from Europe.
Oh, damn. That puts it into perspective that I never thought about before. That is neat.
And it has half the value of the East Coast. Instead of fertile lands and navigable rivers, you get mostly mountains, desert, tundra. All in all, even if the Ming had made it to America, they probably wouldn't have seen worth in it. Sadly, as cool of an idea as it is, to the Ming, it would only be a terrible idea. Actually, to the Ming, it wouldn't be an idea to begin with. Alright, so instead of China going east, what if the Aztecs did? Like, they load up their Jaguar Warriors on big canoes and somehow sail to fight the Spanish. Probably don't even need to explain why this scenario isn't the most realistic, but let's do it anyway.
It's
Let's say
fine.
that first contact doesn't work out for Cortez. He dies. But unlike that one video I did recently, this timeline goes even more off the rails. Imagine, if you will, the Aztecs invading Europe. Ignore the lack of seafaring tech needed to even reach Europe in the first place, somehow they make it. So what if they had
I mean, it's plausible that in killing Cortez, they just take Cortez's ships and reverse engineer it. Now, of course, would that take many years? And in that time, the Spanish would have just probably sent more people. Yes.
Well, one, the mindset societies like the Aztec or Inca even had regarding war was just completely different than that of the old world. Flower wars were more about tribute and influence, rather than direct control and subjugation. It wasn't really in the Aztec mindset to conquer this land to rule it. The main thing they would do is kidnap the losing soldiers and civilians for sacrifice. Kind of a less efficient but more horrifying version of the Barbary pirates, I guess. Because unlike pirates, who have muskets and iron swords, the Aztecs still have, you know, spears, obsidian spears, maybe a few captured muskets, but that's it. And they'd have to use that to try to conquer Spain. I almost feel like a buzzkill bringing this one up, because, like, it's just a neat little fictional idea. Why am I bullying it? But no fun to be had in this video. We have to be entirely serious and say that Jaguar Warriors couldn't possibly conquer early modern Europe. Hope you learned something.
Trent affair. Ugh.
On face value, this scenario is pretty interesting. The POD being Prince Albert dying a little earlier than in our timeline. Queen Victoria never receives his advice to find a diplomatic solution to the Trent affair. As a result, the Warhawks and the British ministry stoke the flames, seeing an opportunity to break the rising economic potential of the United States, leading to the UK siding with the Confederacy. But here's the thing. Regardless of what the ministry wanted, the voting members in Parliament were not keen on going to war with the states. Trade relations between
Or supporting a slave-owning state.
the two countries were strong, and only getting stronger. The North was a huge importer of British manufactured goods, and exporter of raw goods fueling British factories. The idea that the British textile industry was dependent on southern cotton is kind of an overblown generalization. Britain diversified its cotton industry in order to benefit from its vast colonial empire. Egypt and India could easily replace any losses as a result of the Union blockade. There was just too much good business between the two, across all levels of society. But enough about money. Would you really believe a scenario in which an increasingly anti-slavery Britain aligns itself with the slave-owning South after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation? Britain would have to fight a war that its population disagreed with over moral virtues. Only a decade later, the atrocities committed by the Ottomans against Bulgaria led to a huge public outcry. This tied Britain's hands, forced them to abandon their pro-Ottoman stance, meant to keep Russia at bay. And we already know that Britain was very unhappy with the French intervention in Mexico. Keep in mind that a war with the Union wouldn't be a simple expedition. It would require a vast amount of manpower and resources. Canada would become vulnerable to an invasion, and the Northern Ironclads would offset the power of the Royal Navy. A good, realistic scenario where the Confederates still win is probably out there, but this is certainly not it.
No.
Oh yeah, now we're in Kaiserreich territory. There are many different ideas which ultimately lead to a German win in World War I. No American intervention, a successful spring offensive. But Italy changing sides is probably the most common one I've seen. Like many of the scenarios on this list, this seems pretty plausible to the naked eye, but as anyone who understands the Great War will tell you, this one is bonkers. And no, Jimmy, but because Italy's siding with Austro-Hungary is not just an improbability, it's impossible. There is an argument.
Oh, I mean, I think it would have taken a shit ton of diplomatic overtures in order for the two to actually work together. Like, Austro-Hungary would have had to give up land in exchange. And of course, whether or not that is integrally impossible, I cannot say for Austria-Hungary. Like, would they have been so adamant about refusing to give up land? I can't say. Obviously, in our timeline, we know what happens. But I don't know. It's hard to say.
That the offer of Somalia, Djibouti, Nice,
Yeah,
Savoy,
booty.
and Tunisia were more appealing than the Entente's promises, and that's just hilarious. Italians
Yeah.
considered the territory of Trent, Istria, and South Tyrol as Italia Irredenta, or the unredeemed Italy. Unlike southern France, these territories had many Italian speakers. Additionally, the Treaty of London in 1915 pledged a ton of land in the Dalmatian coast and even Anatolia. Despite being in the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austro-Hungary, that was a purely defensive alliance, which wouldn't force the Italians to go up against a coalition with considerably more naval power. In 1914, the fragile Italian economy was dependent on American, French, and British imports, particularly coal. The South still relied on subsistence farming, and Italy also imported large amounts of food from France. By joining Germany, Italy would risk a total blockade of the boot. They would have to face a more powerful French army, suffer economic collapse, and essentially give up its claim on what they considered rightful Italian lands. All of which would be done so they could aid the aggressor who offered them fewer rewards.
Okay, that's a fair argument made that I do agree with. But I do believe that there is an alternate scenario in which Austria-Hungary would have been willing to give up that land, possibly. Obviously, a lot of things would have to change though, and whether or not that would end up being like antithetical to what Austria-Hungary is in 1914, I don't know.
Oh goody, another Civil War scenario.
Yay.
This time in the interwar period. It hasn't been too long since the Lenin video, and I can't help but see the similarities in this scenario to the Russian Civil War. Yet again, we see an overconfident government split into many different factions,
Yippee.
each with their own interests. The Republicans were divided into moderates, socialists, anarchists, communists, and regionalists, while the nationalists were far more united. On top of that, the majority of officers sided with Franco, further hampering Republican leadership. Many see the Spanish War as a training exercise where foreign powers got to test out their toys, and that is certainly true. But no matter how many volunteers and equipment you throw at the Republicans, or how much you nerf the German support, the nationalists still come out on top. Germany's Condor Legion, 19,000 strong, was a crucial factor in the war. But even before their arrival, the Republicans are being slapped around all over the peninsula. In 1936, even after Germany absorbed Austria, Britain and France were petrified of a regional conflict, escalating into another world war. They and the US were committed to their non-intervention agreements, and also afraid of the spread of communism. So while it may be fun to postulate a world where Hitler didn't support the nationalists, or Franco got shot, the reality is that the Republicans were their own worst enemy, and no divergence can fix that. So picture this. Oppenheimer either gets killed or never put in charge of the Manhattan Project. The US is forced to perform the biggest amphibious landing in human history. All in all, 760,000 Americans would descend upon the Japanese in this final bloody chapter of the war. There are numerous scenarios revolving around World War II. In 1941, the Soviets and Japan signed a neutrality pact, that was valid until 1946. But at Yalta, Stalin promised Churchill and Roosevelt that the Soviets would join the war in the East 3 months after Germany's surrender. And then on August 8th, 7 hours before Nagasaki, a bewildered Japan read that the Soviets broke the treaty and had just declared war. Talk about a bad day. By August 11th, South Sakhalin was occupied, and Japanese intelligence estimated that the Allied invasion was only a few months away. Which was right, because downfall was scheduled for November 1st. People make these simulations in which 600,000 Japanese, all loyal to the Emperor and the Bushido Code, fight against the Americans for every island. But in reality, Japan was ready to give up. Like, it was over. The thing is, they were against the unconditional surrender of the Potsdam Declaration. The Supreme Council was already meeting and discussing the terms when they heard of Nagasaki, and they still didn't surrender after either bombing, despite not knowing that those were the only bombs America had. That Soviet invasion in Manchuria was just kind of the final nail in the coffin. Manchuria was Japan's breadbasket, and all of it was lost to the Soviets within 3 weeks. They never anticipated that the Allies and commies would work together, and they were willing to stall for time, but this blitz melted that hope away. By the time November rolls around and the invasion is about to begin, that unconditional surrender would either be accepted, or a slightly softer version of it would be negotiated to avoid hundreds of thousands of lost lives. Yes, I did believe that misconception too.
I think I watched his video on Downfall years ago. I feel like that's one of the ones I've reacted to.
Man, this scenario could honestly be a whole video. Look, Man the High Castle was never meant to be a realistic alternate scenario. When it was first written, alternate history wasn't even really
Oh, I didn't even know Ursula K. Le Guin did an intro for Man in the... That's neat.
a thing. This was a trendsetter. This was just another science fiction story by Philip K. Dick, a science fiction author. This is like overanalyzing Blade Runner as unrealistic. This map isn't meant to be accurate, but sometimes people on the internet still post about it, like it is. Like this is really what—
I love how Canada is just Canada. Why do they get to be free? What the fuck?
Sometimes people on the internet still post about it, like it is. Like this is really what America would be like if World War II went a different way. And that's where I draw the line. You really did it this time. So, in the world of High Castle, Germany wins. America never recovered from the Great Depression because FDR was shot in the face, and they were economically too weak to wage a war against Germany. At the same time, Germany also created the atomic bomb first, nuking America's East Coast and launching a joint invasion with the Japanese on the United States. By the time of this alternate 1960s, America is pretty much split down the middle between the two. Cool story premise, interesting dystopia, not an actual threat. This was never gonna happen. For one, Hitler never had any intention to make an atomic bomb. The Nazis deemed atomic fission as Jewish magic, because many of the most renowned physicists at the time, like Einstein or Oppenheimer, were Jewish. A Hiroshima-style bombing to force an American surrender was never in the cards. And really, this was something that would always be held over Germany's head, whether they won the war on the ground or not. But this isn't about Germany winning World War II. Oh no, this is about this scenario, this map. And this map wouldn't happen because none of the Axis had plans to invade America. Attack America? Sure. Japanese raids on the West Coast, if somehow the American Navy just failed. Bioweapons. German U-boats terrorizing East Coast shipping. Yeah, sure, I guess. But there was never any plans by any nation to land troops in America and actually conquer it. That wasn't even in their war aims. Japan wanted America to back down so they could create their empire in Asia, and also kind of get revenge for cutting off their oil supply. And Germany wanted America to stop aiding Britain and the Soviets. The US really stopped both from achieving their conquests, but it was never a conquest itself. It's America. It's huge. Had the war gone differently, the US would have still remained untouched. It would be politically isolated, assuming the Axis even remain in power, but territorial-wise, it'd be the same. North America is literally a fortress. It is an ocean away from all of its enemies. There is just no possible way that Japan or Germany, even at their height, would have been able to land and successfully invade the United States. If you want to have a more realistic scenario that still has man the high castle elements, you could maybe imagine a world where the United States itself has a fascist revolution in response to the Axis victory. Like, the old American government falls and the new one is ideologically allied to the Nazis, Henry Ford style. So there you have it, 10 scenarios. Did I spoil the fun? I sure did. But that's sometimes fun in itself. Thanks to all the Discord members who took part in the...
And that was 10 alternate scenarios that are actually dumb by Alternate History Hub. This was fun. Really only one of these that I kind of sort of disagree with. And that would be, which one was it? Actually, no, I don't really disagree with any of these. Well, I guess the Italy one. But yeah, the Italy joining the Central Powers is really dependent upon the fact of whether or not the changes needed to be made to Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary being willing to give up Italian claims to Italy. Had Austria-Hungary, like, if that was, like we talk about with alternate scenarios for World War II, a lot of the alternate scenarios for Germany's success in World War II requires a fundamental change of Nazi ideology for them to be able to win. Would it be a fundamental change to to the leadership of Austria? Would it be a fundamental change to the leadership of Austria-Hungary at the time in order to get them to bribe and get Italy to switch sides? Or, well, to join their side and fight the French? I don't know. Maybe. But if it's not a fundamental change to their ideology at the time, then I think it's a possible scenario. Like, I think Italy could have been convinced and not worried too much about the French military. I think definitely the British blockade would have been perhaps something to worry about. But I think Germany would have probably been able to sway them to, like, they're like, hey, you join our side, we give you the Italian territories you lay claim to. We beat the French, you get some prosperous French land in southern France. Boom, bada bing, and we're winning against the Russians. With your support, we will be able to focus more troops on the Russian border. Right? And Russia has a lot of flat lands that are agricultural, specifically in Ukraine. And so that could help alleviate Italian concerns for food. Right? So I think out of all of these, the Italian one is one that is not entirely stupid. It is just dependent upon what is fundamental to leadership ideology at the time, which is something I do not know about because I'm not an expert on that time period. I don't know much about Austria-Hungary. But anyways, that was that video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.